Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming. Good to see your faces. I'm Kathleen. I'm in the English department, and I teach English and creative writing, mostly workshops, but in all genres. Juan has been my student. I'm not familiar with the other students, but based on their bios, I'm very excited to get to introduce them. And I've read the works that they're going to be reading all of our excerpts from today, so I think it's going to be good. So I guess, Caitlin, if you want to just let me know when you think we should start based on when everybody can join.
Okay, it looks like she's going to try calling in. We're trying to just work around because for some reason it's not letting her in the meeting. So if we can start with the other presentations first, maybe, if that's all right.
All right, so we are, I think, going to have 4 student presenters presenting their work today, hopefully if everyone can make it. And so we will start with one at the beginning. And so just format-wise, how it's going to go, the presenters are going to share their pieces, and I'll introduce them sort of as we go along. And I would say that if, Caitlin, this makes sense to you, for Q&A, we'll do a Q&A at the end, fielding questions from the audience or questions for each other. And so if you want to put the questions in the chat feature, I think that'll be the best way to do it. And then I can sort of pose them to the whole group and to the students, and we'll go from there. So feel free, I would say, as you go, if you have questions, just go ahead and type them so you don't forget them, and we'll scoop them up at the end. So Juan, are you ready? All right.
Yeah, I'm ready.
So, all right, so here's the introduction. Juan Manuel Sandoval is a junior going into his senior year at DePaul. He is majoring in secondary English education, hoping to become an English teacher, as well as a publishing poet and writer. He lives in Gage Park on the Southside of Chicago and is proudly Latinx and queer. Most of his writing focuses on queering the body and stories from his own experiences as a Mexican-American, Latinx queer person living in a country ruled by the white hegemonic masculine norm of a patriarchal, heterosexual, and white society. So please welcome Juan Sandoval. So applause.
Thank you. Okay, so my piece is titled "Yeah, This Is My Belly," and it's a poem. So I'll go ahead and start reading it. I caught myself looking in the mirror one day, whispers circling round my head. A booming voice crushed them under her thick legs said, "This your belly, it's a mound of dough. It rises with the heat of your love. It's uncontainable." I pressed my hand on the caramel mound, and it was warm and breathed in and out, and I smiled a bit, just a bit. Why hadn't I seen it before? The life being baked behind the eyes of indoors. Yeah, this is my belly, this one right here. When I sit down, doughy rolls starting to push out, I say, yeah, this is my belly, this one right here. I slap it like a drum. Rum pa pum pum. I knead it, roll it, squeeze it. It needs a day, a whole ass day in the sun so the rays can make it gold in the top, or won't be baked like my mama would want. She'd say, those aren't legs. Esas son unas piernas. You got chocolate, liquid chocolate in those veins. Men breathe in and out because they want to taste. The chocolate boils with their simmering gaze, passion uncontained. I want the men to come closer, gaze through their starved eyes at the way beauty can't contain my beauty in a pan. My soul fluffs off the sides and above the lip. Yeah, this is my belly, this one right here. There ain't no shame in this black forested loaf of mine. This yeast only breathes in and out, so don't think, just eat it like that. I'm not giving this to men with small mouths that spend days with wandering stomachs, biting dead bellies, flat bellies, undercooked bellies, because these legs are for big mouth men to rest their heads between so they can eat living bellies, bellies baked. My mama would shake her head, say, these are thin men, men that haven't ate a body horneado with the heat of the hands. All they want to do is follow a recipe and apply it to something incontenible, something ancient with love. When they catch sight of this belly through the doors of my legs, there'll be no tools, no list, just teeth-sinking, tongue-licking men saying, yeah, this is your belly. The mirror will cry. He will cry as he gazes at the way they pick at the crumbs. So many days have died to setting sun since I spared him a glance. I had let him tear me apart, in and out. But now he'll watch how the men kiss it, this rising belly, this body that breathes in and out. The oven is my friend. Her booming voice cracks the mirror in his half-baked lies. She says, look at that. Feel that gravity. Ese peso, that hearty warmth. The day can't shame you into hiding all that espíritu away. She's right. Aren't I uncontainable? Aren't I proud? To feed an espíritu mexicano, you gotta love that shit saying, sí, esta es mi panza. It's heavy, it's rich. To carry it, it needs cinnamon-scented, oven-roasted, hairy black legs. It don't need light legs, white legs, plain legs, those barren legs. Spirit needs pierna. Your mama gotta cantar esa receta until you can sing each verse in and out, until between the smell of sugar cane and rice grains, you hear the pan say, sí, esta es tu panza. Everyone will sing. I can hear it now. My mama, the oven, the pan's voice now, baked with that ancient love I found, say, this your belly. It's a mound of dough. It rises with the heat of your love. It's uncontainable. My belly is not no second, no minute, no pale-colored hour. It's a day, a death, a rise, a color. With my hands I part these piernas. Let the chocolate ooze out of my baked veins. The men breathe in and out at the sight of me, my pride incontenible. I say, sí, esta es mi panza, and never do I go hungry for a day. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you so much. That was great. And it looks like everybody's here. And since we started at the end of the alphabet with our presenters, we'll go to Tess next. So again, if you're just joining us, I'm just introducing everyone as we go. And then again, I would encourage everyone, if you have questions, to type them in the chat as they occur to you, because we'll have time at the end for that discussion. And participants, feel free to post questions to each other, just whatever strikes you. So next up, we have Tess Melvin. Tess is a sophomore studying film and creative writing. She has been published with LZHS Literary Magazine's Roots, UW Milwaukee's literary magazine Furrow, and multimedia publication Teen Inc., and currently works as a teaching artist with the Chicago-based youth spoken word organization T-WAAP. She'd like to have a hand in changing the world, but she'll settle for making art that matters. Tess can be reached professionally through her website, which is tessmelvin.com. And so here is Tess. Welcome to Tess.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me okay? Good, wonderful, okay. I'm going to be presenting my short fiction piece, Beneath. Please note that this piece does contain themes of suicidal ideation. Sometimes I don't want to come back up, she says. I look up from the water. My legs are pale and white beneath the surface. Hers are burnished and lanky and dotted with freckles. She moves them back and forth, stirring up unseen currents that buffet my ankles. Her eyes are trained on the other side of the pool. I think it'd be nice, she says. Sunlight catches in her eyelashes when she blinks. Just to go under and stay there. We'd come here when we were kids and practiced holding our breath underwater. My record was 40 seconds, hers was 63. She claims she can't do it anymore, and today she'd come up for air before the 24th second was up. Now rivulets of water roll off her skin and soak the bleached concrete beneath us. I'm shivering a little, but she hasn't moved at all. You'd drown, I say. She shrugs and droplets buried in her shoulders glitter and catch my eye. So? So, I say dumbly. Sugar slicks the back of my throat from our cornettos, now bitten to stubs. We couldn't get ice cream together if you drowned. Yeah, she says, I guess that's true. But I think it'd be really pretty under there. A tiny wave breaks against my calf. Quiet. You hate the quiet, I say. You hate the quiet. If you just sank underwater, closed your eyes, and floated down to the bottom, I don't think it'd be that bad. I kick a little tsunami to life and it rolls and ripples toward the far side. She hasn't looked at me. We'd gone to the canyon once and stood at the edge, and she'd had that same look in her eye, distant and dreamless. You could be a mermaid. She smiles a little. Then I definitely couldn't get ice cream with you. Mermaids can eat cornettos. Doesn't seem like they'd like them. You don't know that. I don't want to be a mermaid, she says. It feels better to hold your breath. I watch her as she pushes forward and off the rim. The water parts silently around her, lapping at her shoulders. She tips her head back and the chlorine dissolves her stringy, drying strands into something sleek and lustrous. Will you time me, she says. I swing my foot beneath the surface. Again? I think I can do better. You know, on second thought, I say hastily, I wouldn't want to be a mermaid. I'd get lonely. I'd miss people, you know. She lets go of the wall to float on her back. You could come with me. Yeah, but I'd miss other people. I wouldn't, she says. The water slips shallowly over her face before she bobs back to the surface. Just you. The waves slip behind my knees into the rut and the filters and meet the wall. She looks as colorless under the water as I do in the sun. Come on, time me. I sigh and reach for the stopwatch melting next to my thigh. She pushes herself a little further out, and as I squint into the light, her eyes shine at me just over the surface. The watch chirps in my palm. I look down and up again, and she's underwater, gone. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Tess. That was wonderful to hear out loud. So next up, just continuing to work our way back in alphabetical order, we have Mia Frost. And so Mia is a junior majoring in neuroscience with a minor in creative writing. Her preferred genres of writing are character-driven stories and modern/urban supernatural. The piece she has prepared for today is a section from a longer piece about a young woman struggling to come to terms with her sexuality as she must decide between her boyfriend and her longtime friend and roommate. So please welcome Mia.
Oh, thank you. So I'm just going to do a straight reading of mine. And I'm sorry if you hear a cat in the background. Okay. A small light above the sink was the only source of light in the otherwise dark kitchen. Izzy tossed her purse onto the small table, then fetched a glass from a cabinet beside the sink. She let the water cool down before flipping the switch on the water filter. She set the glass beneath the running stream. She didn't live with Josh. How was she supposed to feel about marrying him? After being Cameron's roommate through college and beyond, she couldn't imagine ever living with someone else. Wasn't sure if she wanted to live with someone else. The overhead light turned on, and Izzy winced against the sudden brightness. She turned and saw Cameron standing in the doorway, her hand by the light switch. Back so soon? Cameron asked. I had a headache. Izzy turned back to the sink. She shut the water off and stared down into the glass. She heard the pantry door open behind her. Pills rattled inside a bottle, then the door shut again. Cameron appeared beside her. He hopped onto the counter and offered Izzy a bottle of Advil. I said I had a headache. I'm fine now. You don't look fine. Cameron set the bottle down. What happened? You guys fight again? I wasn't feeling well, so I asked him to take me home, Izzy said matter-of-factly. And he was such an understanding gentleman about it and didn't argue at all, right? Izzy looked to her left and watched Cameron pull her dark curly hair up into a messy bun. Despite her conscious effort to keep Josh and Cameron apart, she spoke about him enough that Cameron must have been sick of him just through word of mouth. She rarely spoke about Cameron to Josh, though. She would refer to Cameron as simply her roommate with Josh, not using her name. If Josh was going to ask Izzy to marry him, she would have to formally introduce each other sooner or later. Izzy opted for later. You'll have to rein in your sarcasm if you're going to be my possible maid of honor, Izzy said. I think maid of dishonor is a better fit for me. As long as you don't start a mosh pit at the reception, you can be called whatever you want. Why are we talking about weddings? Cameron brushed loose curls from her face. Did Josh propose to you or something? Izzy faced the sink again, staring at the faucet. Not yet, but he will. Cameron let out a curt laugh. And what makes you think that? I saw the ring, Izzy said. I found it in his car. Cameron spun her legs as they dangled from the counter. So you were all caught up in the euphoria of possibly getting proposed to that you felt sick and made Josh take you home. That's definitely a good sign. I need time to think. I want to be prepared when he asks me. If he asks you. Izzy inhaled a sharp breath and slowly released it. If there was going to be a wedding, she was doubtful that Cameron would show up. Izzy hoped she would. She hoped Cameron meant what she said about the past being the past, that she would support Izzy's decision to date a guy. Wait, did she say a guy or specifically Josh? Izzy did not remember. She did remember her final year of college. She remembered Cameron cursing under her breath as she packed for winter break. She remembered telling Cameron that what they did was a mistake and that it could never happen again. She remembered the late Friday night in their dorm room. She remembered moaning out Cameron's name as Cameron's head was between her thighs. She remembered when they sat close together in Izzy's bed. She remembered kissing Cameron. She remembered liking it. Izzy shook the memory off. Cameron was not Josh. Cameron could not give Izzy the Mr. and Mrs. Future she told herself she needed. When Josh proposes, I'll say yes. Simple as that, Izzy said. Cameron frowned. You don't know for sure if he's planning to propose. Don't waste your time waiting for him to do something he's not going to do. I'm good at waiting. A pause. Cameron hopped down from the counter and stood in front of Izzy. Izzy turned to face her, but didn't expect her to be so close. Cameron leaned closer, her eyes intensely staring into Izzy's. Izzy studied every feature of Cameron's face. The thickness of her brows, the sleek slope of her nose, the cupid's bow of her full lips, her lips. Izzy couldn't stop herself from leaning forward as well. Just as she did, Cameron pulled back. Izzy blinked, and from her peripheral vision, she saw that Cameron was holding a glass of water from the sink. Cameron brought the glass to her lips and took the smallest sip. She licked the corner of her mouth for a non-existent dribble. So am I, Cameron whispered. Izzy watched Cameron set the glass down on the counter. She watched the sway of Cameron's hips as she walked through the doorway. She watched Cameron's hand stall at the light switch, her pointer finger circling the switch before flipping it off again. When she was sure that Cameron had left, Izzy scrambled for Advil on the counter. Her hand shook as she popped open the lid and shook 2 pills out.
Yes, applause. Thank you, Mia, for that excerpt. I had the pleasure of reading sort of the longer version too, so it was cool to hear that part out loud. Next up, last but not least, for the reading portion, we have Caitlin. So Caitlin Costello is finishing her first year as an MAWP student at DePaul. She is a proud double demon who received her undergraduate degree in creative writing from DePaul in 2010. Caitlin focuses on writing short stories, both fictional and creative nonfiction, about interpersonal relationships. She plans to utilize her master's degree to teach writing at the college level, and she hopes to someday publish a collection of short stories. So welcome to Caitlin, and applause for Caitlin.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Is the background noise too loud? Okay,
You're good.
Good. So this is a short piece that I plan to develop into something larger, written in Dan Stoller's narrative strategies class, where we emulate several different authors. This happens to be an emulation of Rachel Cusk's novel Outline, where she often characterizes her narrator through robust descriptions and images of other characters in the novel. So I'll read you a bit of the opening and then the closing of the piece. This is called The Current Version. Our conversation while we waited at the hostess stand nearly 20 minutes ago had been bright and cheery and forced. I laughed a little too late at Jeffrey's notorious puns, unused as I had recently become, to being out on a busy weekend at a loud and crowded restaurant. Wild was an Irish restaurant in Boys Town, warm and low lit with smooth mahogany accents, walls lined with bookshelves, and many intricately framed portraits, both of the author himself and of the characters he wrote. I scanned the room for an open space for us. Tables, large and small, circular and squared, were arranged in a close configuration so that servers slid sideways through the gaps between them and diners tucked in their elbows to let them pass by. We were sat by the hostess at a two-top in the middle of this configuration. I felt naked. The tinkle of cutlery and glasses and the rise and fall of murmured voices and buoyant laughter swirled around me like a blustery, damp midwinter wind and raised the hairs on the back of my neck. The server left us to decide on our entrees after noting our wine preference, a bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon. There was no use in ordering by the glass while dining with Jeffrey. When it came to food and drink, he was indulgent, and so was I by association. The two of us would finish a magnum of red wine during our office happy hours every Friday when we worked together 2 years ago. Now, I hadn't seen him in months, and I fancied the help of a healthy buzz to share the story that slowly simmered in my gut. The Brussels sprouts are delicious, Jeffrey put down his menu. I always order the chicken pot pie here. Our server arrived with the wine. Setting our glasses in front of us, she uncorked the bottle and poured a small measure for Jeffrey to taste. He twirled the glass twice, sniffed, sipped, and smiled to signal that it was good. Between lips shiny with balm, his teeth were large and even and white. His creamy skin was accented with 2 rosy patches high on his cheekbones, and his dark, well-groomed eyebrows arched wide over his brown eyes. His hair, too, was brown, although it had been blonde the last time I had seen him. Like then, it was shaved almost bald on the sides, with the longer part on top of his head twisted into a neat knot. He wore a crisp white t-shirt under an oversized black sweater. A thin gold chain glittered at his neck, and that, combined with his shiny lips and glowing skin, gave him a sparkly aura of overall good health, an impression I attributed more to his exceptional skincare routine than to his diet, which I knew consisted mostly of alcohol and buttery Midwestern foods. Jeffrey tilted his glass toward mine, and they met with a clink. "To you," he said. There was a pause, and the way his smile only reached as far as the crinkles in the corner of his round, sad eyes told me that he meant his toast as an opening for me to speak. Jeffrey knew my husband and I were no longer together, but he didn't know why. I had been avoiding this moment for months. Unanswered texts and refused invitations had stretched the tension between us so that admitting the truth felt like stepping onto a tightrope suspended over a chasm. His gaze was a gentle demand for an explanation. Skipping ahead a little bit. Just then, the server returned for our food order. Jeffrey asked for his favorite chicken pot pie, and I opted for the Blackened Chicken Club and Brussels sprouts. All around me, I caught snatches of conversation that, like dipping one's toes into a jacuzzi before sliding beneath the bubbling water, measured the emotional temperature of the room. I wondered what the couple to our right would think when they heard bits and pieces of my story. He had been abusing me the whole time. We're not who you think we are. It was my fault, too. I cheated. I'm sorry I lied. You get to decide how to spin this, Jeffrey replied once I finished speaking. He lifted a forkful of steaming pot pie to his mouth. I must have looked quizzical because he continued. Essentially, you are your own PR team. George will be out here telling his own version of the story that, let's be honest, will probably not be flattering toward you, but you have your truth as well. I probably wouldn't tell people about the affair, Jeffrey added, swallowing another mouthful. If anyone knew how to curate a persona, it was Jeffrey. He grew up in St. Louis, the eldest of 3 brothers. He was charming, intelligent, and an avid lover of entertainment. It was no surprise to his parents when, at the age of 8, he told them he was gay. After a brief but scarring bout of being bullied in high school, his parents had him transferred, and it was then that he learned he could try on a new personality that highlighted that for which he had been teased. Even now, when asked if he would like to talk about what happened to him, he always responds with a soft finality. No. The bullying didn't happen to the current version of him, he said. He had studied the careers of every major female pop star since the 50s, and he concluded that evolution equaled success. You have to be willing to recreate yourself, he told me. Shed the skin. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was excellent. So now we have a few questions already in the chat. So thanks to those of you for getting us started. So we'll start with those, and I think we'll try our best to make the questions apply when possible to everyone. So I guess if the 4 readers want to unmute, that's probably okay. So you can just take turns responding, or I can call on you. But first we have Megan Heffernan says, Juan, I love the idea of the recipe creating something uncontainable, something in excess of the parts of the body that you list. There's a long tradition of thinking about cooking and poetry as similar acts of production, embodied, practical, lived. It's also often a gendered tradition. So this is a very specific question to this piece where it says, do you have any work that you modeled this poem after or favorite sources? But then sort of a follow-up, Michelle says, great question. So this kind of opens it up to everyone. Michelle says, I'd love to hear each author talk about models and inspiration, especially given Mia's fabulous combo of neuroscience and creative writing and Tessa's film and creative writing combo. So I guess we'll just start with Juan, and we can, if it makes sense, kind of go through the order in which people read. So you want to kick us off?
Yeah. So this piece in specific is definitely inspired by a lot of the indigenous Mexican artists that I listen to, and their music. Their music is very like body centric, and it does focus on sort of the relationship of the body to or to other performative acts like cooking, especially. I have a favorite artist in particular. Her name is Lila Downs, and she has a song called La Cumbia del Mole, where she talks about sorrow and how it makes mole taste better when you when you make it, and it creates like this sort of performative dance of sorrow inside the kitchen. So I definitely was inspired by that idea. I was also inspired by a lot of research I've done about queering the classroom, the English classroom. So talking about how one of the worst things in the education system is the way that we limit men's potential performances of gender. So I wanted to have the poem focus on my body as a masculine body and like the different kind of possibilities I give myself in performing my sexuality, my attraction, and things like that. And especially because personally I do often struggle with body image and, you know, self-esteem. So I wanted to have a poem that sort of embodied that Mexican indigenous tradition of sort of being boisterous and proud and body centric. And I wanted to sort of absorb that confidence into myself too. And that's why it's so littered with Spanish phrases. And my mom is such a central figure too, because in a lot of Mexican households and a lot of Mexican writings, the mom is sort of a central figure in a lot of writing. So my mom is a central figure too. The feminine is a very central figure inside the poem, and I absorb it into my own performance of masculinity. So, yeah.
Awesome, great answer. Thank you so much. And next, Tess, if you want to speak to that question as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So this piece was actually originally written quite a few years ago, and in the last year I went over and revised and refurbished it for Professor Mark Turcotte's microprose class. And it at the time that I wrote it was actually about a difficult relationship that I had with someone who was suicidal and had attempted it multiple times over the course of our relationship, and exposed me to a lot of suicidal ideation and rhetoric about why death might be considered an not an easy way out, but preferable to the world that they lived in. I struggled to understand that at the time, not only because she was very important to me, but also just because I have had the privilege never to really feel like that myself. And so when I wrote it at the time, it was an attempt at reconciling how I felt versus how I wanted to understand her, even though our relationship had long since passed. And then I revisited it over this past year and refined it with my hopefully considerably improved writing skills. And I found it very insightful to the point that I kind of inspired myself a little bit. It's always interesting to revisit old work, especially as a creative writer. You are constantly changing and evolving. And I felt almost as if I was looking back at a different person. I'm grateful that I've moved out of that stage in my life. That individual as well, that the piece was based on, is also doing well now. And we both changed a lot, but like I said, it was just very interesting to revisit a self that I didn't necessarily feel connected to anymore, but whose insights became very important in the revision of this piece.
Thanks, Tess. Next, Mia, if you want to sort of answer that models and inspiration question.
Yeah, so in terms of my major and my writing, I've been writing for as long as I could hold a pencil, but with neuroscience, I think I just like writing characters. I like writing imperfect characters, and I think that comes with understanding different like personalities and different like inner workings of the brain. And I'm really interested in that, and just making, how do people become this way? And that ties into just me writing either realistic fiction or character-driven pieces, kind of like a screenplay. And so this was a piece I actually wrote earlier this year for my English class with Rebecca John Strissler for fiction writing. And with my pieces, I like writing, I just like shining a light on stories that I would read. So I like writing about queer characters. I like writing about characters of color. That's my cat, I'm sorry. And I liked writing about the struggle of a woman who's not really sure what she wants, but she thinks she wants one thing, but at the same time, there's something right in front of her that she's afraid for multiple reasons to go after. And yeah, so I wanted to give a little story that kind of highlights that. I think, Kathleen, you said you've read the piece. So the original draft had a sadder ending where she just went ahead with Josh and she wasn't happy, but yeah.
Excellent. It's good to have that piece of information, like the director's cut of like how it evolved. That's cool. Caitlin, however you want to sort of field this question.
Yeah, I think, I've recently been introduced to the idea of autofiction. So that's something that I've been exploring in my work this year. And, something that I also share a lot of, similar kind of motivations as Tess and Mia were speaking about, writing about imperfect characters or examining a character that you used to be. And kind of telling a new story now that you've moved on from something. And so I've been obsessed with this idea of people telling stories about themselves and living that out. And a lot of the work that I've been reading this quarter in particular is about stories within stories, and how two people can come away from something and have two completely different narratives about an experience that they shared. So I'm trying to explore that. I'm still on the way, I think.
Thank you. And we have another question is for Tess, and I think it also applies obviously to Mia, who kind of touched on it a little, but I think everyone could feel free to also answer. The question is for Tess: how do your two disciplines, creative writing and film, interact and inform each other? But I think, if anyone else wants to also jump in and just talk about, like other stuff that's not writing that you found really vital to your process or to your work.
Should I start us off? Okay. Yeah, great question. Full disclosure, I spent most of my life thinking that I was going to be an English major, and it was only last minute at the English department orientation at DePaul that I decided that I wanted to change my major and minor in creative writing instead. So I actually haven't had as much experience with the intersection of those two disciplines as much as I have with writing in general, especially because I only took up screenwriting, I think 4 years ago, and I've been working rather sporadically on it ever since. I've been writing, like Mia said, ever since I could pick up a pen. I have been told that I have a very visual technique, to the point that a lot of what I write does feel cinematic, and I've written like that my whole life. Everything that I've written, I've been able to very clearly visualize. And I think that was part of why the transition into film and television felt so natural for me. I'm always visualizing my ideas on a cinematic scale, even if they're very small and intimate, like two girls sitting by the pool in the dead of summer. I think in a lot of ways, because the process of writing for me is about finding and communicating an aesthetic. And that process very much parallels the language of cinema for me. You know, there's a lot you can say with your cuts, like sentence length and punctuation, or set design, exposition and world building, sound design, sensory details and dialogue, or like cinematography as imagery, etc. As weird as it sounds, the more I've kind of ventured into the world of film, the more I've realized that writing for me is a lot like directing. Depicting and controlling this plethora of different elements for the reader to engage with. And like I said, I've kind of always written like this. It's just that now that I have this perspective as a film major, and then naturally, because I have the privilege of having gotten to write all of my life and engage with other writers, I have been able to bring that experience to my screenwriting. To have a jumping off point, so to speak, for that has been quite useful, even though, and I can't emphasize this enough, writing a screenplay and writing fiction are very, very, very different things.
Great. And then I think, Mia, you touched on it a bit, but if you want to, I would love to hear a little bit more about like that neuroscience, creative writing balance, or
Sure.
how you think of each of them.
So I guess I didn't realize that I do have a more scientific style of writing, or like describing scenes outside of just the dialogue. It's very kind of like clinical or analytical of a scene. And it's, I guess, sometimes I use it to my advantage based on what I'm writing, because it's like the omniscient third person, which is what I normally write with. But if I want to get inside the head of a character, that's kind of where the more like neurosci comes in. It's like, how does this character think? And I want to understand how their brain works so I can convey their motivations better. And on the flip side, there's a lot of writing in science that I don't think non-STEM people know. Like, there's a lot of writing, and some of it can be creative. Like, if you're writing a paper or like a thesis paper, you have to know how to sell a story. You have to know how to tell a story. And so knowing structure, like most structural ideas of writing, does come in handy with that. And writing academic papers, to this point, it's helped because I kind of just write how I talk, which is kind of how I write for fiction. And when you don't have specific, this is what science writing is, this is what fiction writing is, when you kind of just ignore that and blend the two, it becomes a lot easier to get your ideas across, in my experience.
Excellent, thank you. And then I guess since we're kind of going in reverse alphabetical order on this one, and then we'll come back to the end of the alphabet. Caitlin, do you have any thoughts on this question that you want to add?
I was thinking, and it's hard because I think I draw, inspiration from a lot of places. Obviously, music, film. For me, like, I'll often be writing and I'll have to like sit down and have a specific movie on in the background, while I'm writing. But more so than anything, I really have been forcing myself to focus on creating imagery in my work. Something that I know we hear all the time is show, don't tell. And, you only get your point across through using concrete sensory details. So, I will literally sit and agonize over something because I will force myself to say, can the reader see this? Can they smell this? Can they hear it? So that's something that I've particularly undertaken as a challenge of mine. But yeah.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And last but not least on this one, Juan.
That's actually funny. because as a teacher, like I'm super aware of a lot of reading, writing, listening, speaking strategies that people use in general, because I have to be able to sort of teach those and assess those and do things like that. And one of the things that I do in my writing is I do a lot of translanguaging, which is a concept that comes from ELL education, from English language learner education, that sometimes when you're bilingual, you sort of either unconsciously or consciously replace certain words or phrases or structures, grammatical structures, for ones in your primary language. So if something doesn't like fit well with you in something that you write, you find something that sounds or means something, fits the meaning that you're trying to capture better in your other language. So you do a lot of like pulling from each one. So I do a lot of that in my writing, and I do it consciously most of the time. I do it because I know I can do it, and I want to do it. And just also now that I'm a lot more better at like finding out things about grammar and stuff like that. I took a course on grammar and style too for my major as an education teacher. And I'm just like a lot more aware of how grammatical structures work. So I like employ those a lot when I write now too. I'm much more aware of like things like, strategically using things like fragments and things like that to like better improve your writing. And just also, I actually wrote this poem in Kathleen's class last year. And it actually started first as a villanelle that I ended up throwing out because I hated it. And I turned it into a sestina. So like the actual form of the poem is a sestina, which is perfect because sort of the focus of the entire poem is this obsession, this positive obsession with like my own body as an act of like reclamation. So I kind of use that sestina structure with my translanguaging. So like some of the words that I repeat at the end of the phrases are actually in Spanish. So like I translanguage to like switch things around into Spanish phrases or Spanish forms of the things I'm already repeating to sort of at the same time make them different and mean kind of different things. So yeah, I definitely think that my education, my major in education definitely informs me as a writer. I definitely do a lot of teacher thinking when I'm writing. So yeah.
Excellent. And we are, almost out of time. We're technically, at time, but we have, I think, a little bit of a buffer. So I won't keep everyone too long, but I do think, one question that I had, and then I just wanted to give everyone one more chance to sort of share their voice and share their thoughts. This is the identity and relationships panel. So it's open-ended, but I thought we could just go, and I'll probably go alphabetical this time, just starting with Caitlin. If you want to speak to, kind of why you think your work fits on this panel, or if you have any thoughts on identity or relationships, or why you think these concepts are important to your work or important in the world right now, just however you kind of want to take that open-ended question about sort of the organizing principle of this panel as kind of a way to, wrap it all up. So Caitlin.
Yeah, I was so pleased and a little surprised when I saw how, that what our category was, because while I am obsessed with writing about relationships, I often take kind of like a quiet approach to things. Like there's not much heavy action in what I write. Like I like to kind of observe and see the dynamics between people play out in my writing. So I was like, oh wow, I do write about identity and relationships, but it took putting the label on it for me to actually understand that. And, for me, writing some creative nonfiction and doing autofiction, I think I recently reclaimed, and I love that word, by the way, my own identity and my own voice. I think I'm creating for the first time, even though I'm 31 years old. And so, the only thing I can find myself writing about is that new identity that I have. Having come out of an abusive relationship myself, it felt like I completely died and was born anew. So it was an unusual opportunity to start over. And I think we all get opportunities like that, but sometimes it happens very drastically. And yeah, I literally refer to the last year or so as my rebirth. So I think it's impossible not to explore that idea in my writing moving forward. I've actually felt, more compelled than ever to write. So, I just think in general, everyone writes about identity and relationships. It's just a matter of how you approach it.
Excellent, thank you, great answer. And so next up we have Mia. So however, Mia, you wanna sort of field that question.
Yeah, I would agree with Caitlin that I'm more of an observer of relationship dynamics, and what I do write a lot about identity and relationships, because I like saying, we have this person, how do they interact when technically they shouldn't? And I just like writing stuff that I wish I had when I was in middle school or was in high school. Like, I like writing queer stories. I like writing stories where the leads are people of color, because I didn't really have a lot of that growing up. And so if I could be the person to write and publish those stories, and I do put myself, even though it's fiction, I do put a lot of my own identities in these stories. So yeah, that's mostly my take on the question, I guess.
Excellent, thank you very much. And so next up, Tess, however you want to go with this one.
Yeah, this was actually an exception for me because I am primarily a genre writer, leaning heavily into science fiction. This is actually not in this kind of story is not actually in my field. But like I said, it was written a couple of years ago, and it was written at a time when I was struggling to come to terms with the trauma that I had experienced, that I had been in an abusive relationship. Caitlin, I resonated so hard with so much of what you said that it was actually spooky, And so that summer when I wrote this story, it felt like a very liminal space. I was coming back to myself. I was thinking about my sexuality and what I wanted to do in my relationships going forward, and what I would do if I were ever faced with something like that again, because the fact is that there are people who are depressed and suicidal, and you can't cut them out of your life just because of some trauma that you yourself haven't dealt with. And so that was part of my process. I am very interested in investigating identity and relationships in my writing, but usually it's set to the backdrop of something else, like a heist in space or a paranormal romance. So like I said, this is different for me. It's rare that I have the opportunity to write something this quiet and intimate and deeply personal. And I'm glad that I had a piece that kind of fits so neatly into the theme of this panel, because it's such a universal thing to write about. Everyone says, write what you know, and what do we know better than ourselves and the relationships we have with other people.
Excellent. And last but not least, Juan, however you want to bring it all back home for us here.
I just think that one of the most awesome things about being a human being is that I think that our identities and our lives are just made up of relationships. That part of the reason that we know who we are is because of the people that we interact with and we have relationships with, the love and the pain and the hate that we feel. And your relationships extend even to the relationship you have with your own body, and that's one of the most private and intimate ones. And that's why I kind of like focusing on this idea of how people perceive their own bodies, because I feel like sometimes we're scared to talk about how we feel about our bodies, whether it's positive or negative. And I guess when it comes to bodies, a lot of the time in my writing, I talk about the unlovable male body that I kind of imagine as a result of our normative heterosexual system of masculinity that we have in our society, where men sort of violently reach out to sort of claim and possess and love other bodies because they're not allowed to love their own in the ways that they might want to love them. And so that's the importance of queering sexuality and the presentation of gender, because a lot of men are limited because they're afraid or they don't understand how they can love their bodies because they're not allowed to, or they're not allowed to love bodies like theirs, other men's bodies. So that's why I think that sort of the focus of my writing is particularly kind of like focused on bodies, because I feel like a lot of the times in order to be able to have these healthy relationships with other people, especially for men, they have to sort of grapple with how they feel about themselves, about their own bodies, before they can start reaching out in positive ways to other people. So, yeah.
Excellent. And I think we'll leave it there, but I do want to just thank everyone. I think, jumping off of something, Juan, you said about how like there's so much of a connection, like our identity is relational and it has so much to do with the relationships to the people around us and the things we choose to spend time with other people doing. And so I guess to be corny, I will say thank you all for giving me something excellent to do this afternoon and the chance to think about identity and relationships in this community. We're far apart, obviously, by necessity, but I feel very close to you and grateful for this chance. So one more round of applause for everyone. I guess you can mute or unmute or just visual applause, but thank you so much. So have a great rest of the conference and a great rest of your afternoon. Thanks, guys.